Chicago in February does not ask if you are ready. It simply arrives. The wind came off Lake Michigan that Tuesday night like a judgment. Sharp, indifferent, finding every crack in the walls of Miriam Cole's third-floor apartment on South Halsted Street, as though the building itself had given up trying to hold it out. She had stuffed the gaps with old newspaper weeks ago. It hadn't been enough. Nothing had been enough for a very long time. She sat on the bare floor beside the pulled-out sofa bed, her back against the frame, knees drawn to her chest. 3 feet away, her triplets slept. Eli, Ada, and Zara, not yet 4 years old, bundled in doubled socks and winter coats, laid over them like blankets, because the actual blanket could only cover 2. She had arranged them carefully before they fell asleep. Ada in the middle because she ran the coldest. Eli and Zara pressed close on either side. She had not eaten since yesterday morning. Welcome back, Story Family. And if you're new here, hey, we're glad you found us. Make sure you subscribe, like, and drop a comment before you leave. New stories hit this channel all the time, and trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming. And after you watch, tell us what you thought. Your comment might be exactly what someone else needed to hear today. So don't hold back. Let's talk about it. The children had eaten. A bowl of oatmeal each. No milk, no sugar, just hot water, and the last of a canister she'd been rationing since Thursday. That was 12 hours ago. They were sleeping through the hunger now, or their small chests rising and falling with the particular piece of children who still trusted the world to be okay in the morning. Miriam did not share that trust anymore. Little Ada stirred. Her eyes opened, dark and slow and full of the kind of faith that only the very young carry. And she looked at her mother in the dim light of the single lamp. "Mama," she whispered, "my tummy still hurts." Miriam moved to the sofa bed and pulled her close, pressing her lips to the top of her daughter's head, breathing in the smell of her. Cheap shampoo, sleep, and something impossibly sweet underneath it all. "I know, baby," she said softly. "Go back to sleep. When you wake up, we'll eat." Ada's eyes were already closing. "Promise?" Miriam held her tighter. Outside, the wind pressed against the glass like it wanted something. "Promise," she said. She had no idea how she would keep it. The Maxwell Street Market in February was a stubborn thing. It had no business being open in this cold. Vendors hunched inside layers, breath rising in white clouds above stalls of second-hand furniture, salvaged tools, winter produce, and goods that had clearly lived several lives before arriving here. But open it was, because Chicago had always been a city that kept moving even when it had every reason to stop. Miriam moved through it with the practiced desperation of someone who had done this before and hated herself for it every time. The bread vendor first, a heavy-set man in a bear's cap she had spoken to twice before. He shook his head before she finished asking, eyes sliding past her to the next customer. "Can't do it every week, lady. I got my own bills." She nodded. She understood. She moved on. The produce woman near the back. Miriam recognized her. A stout woman with kind eyes who had slipped her a bag of bruised apples 2 weeks ago. Today she hesitated longer, looked at the triplets standing close together behind Miriam's legs, holding hands the way they always did in unfamiliar places. Then she reached under the table and came up with a small paper sack. 2 apples, a handful of baby carrots, a bread roll going stale. "Don't make a habit," she said, not unkindly. "Thank you," Miriam said, and she meant it with everything she had left. She was standing at the edge of the market, back to the parking structure, rationing the bag in her head, half an apple each, roll split 3 ways, when the skin on the back of her neck prickled. Someone was watching her. She turned slowly. He stood at the far end of the row, near the entrance to the parking deck, completely still in a way that did not belong to someone browsing or waiting. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a plain dark coat that was expensive in the quiet way. No logo, no flash, just quality that didn't need to announce itself. His hair was dark, his jaw sharp, and his eyes were fixed on her with a focused, unreadable steadiness that should have sent her walking in the other direction. She looked away, pulled Zara and Ada closer, took Eli's hand. When she looked back, he was walking toward her. He stopped 2 feet away, close enough to talk quietly, far enough not to crowd. He looked briefly at the triplets, not with pity, not with curiosity, but with a calm attention, as though he was confirming something he had already calculated, then back at her. "You've been to 4 stalls," he said. His voice was low and unhurried, carrying the faint remnant of an accent she couldn't place. East Coast, maybe, or something older than geography. 2 turned you away. 1 gave you something small. You've checked your coat pocket 3 times since I've been watching. Whatever's in it isn't enough for dinner. Miriam's jaw tightened. "Who are you?" "Someone who notices things," he said. A pause. "I'll buy you groceries, a full cart, everything you need." "Why?" He was quiet for a moment, not hesitating, she would realize later, but choosing exactly how much to give her. "Because I need a wife," he said, "and you need a way out of whatever this is." The market noise continued around them as though nothing unusual was happening. A vendor calling prices, a cart rattling over broken pavement. Someone's radio playing too loud 2 stalls over. Miriam stood in the middle of all of it and felt the world go very still. "That's insane," she said. "Yes," he agreed, without apology or embarrassment. "You're a stranger. You were a stranger to your husband once." She stared at him. Something in her wanted to laugh at the audacity of it. Something else? The part of her that had been awake at 3 in the morning, calculating how many days of oatmeal she had left, was listening very carefully. "I have 3 children," she said. "Triplets, 3 years old. They go where I go, every single time. That is not a negotiation point." He looked at the children again. Eli was watching him with the suspicious gravity of a small person who had learned to read rooms. Ada had her head tilted, openly curious. While Zara had moved slightly in front of her siblings, a gesture so instinctive it was almost funny. A 3-year-old standing guard. Something shifted almost imperceptibly in his expression. Not softness, exactly. Recognition. "I know," he said. "I've been watching you for 2 days." That should have frightened her more than it did. "Your name," she said. "Marcus," he said. "Marcus Vane." He reached into his coat and placed a plain white card on top of her produce bag. A phone number. Nothing else? No title, no company, no address. As though he had never needed to explain himself to anyone. "Think about it," he said. "Call me by 6 o'clock tonight. If you don't, I won't come near you again." He looked at her one final time, that same steady, unreadable look. "But I think you'll call." He turned and walked back toward the parking structure. A black Escalade waited in the shadow of the deck. A driver stepped out and opened the rear door without being told. Marcus got in, and the vehicle pulled out cleanly. No hesitation, disappearing into the gray Chicago morning before Miriam could fully process what had just happened. She stood in the February cold, holding apples and carrots and a bread roll, and a white card with a phone number on it. 3 small children looking up at her with quiet, waiting eyes. Eli tugged her sleeve. "Mama, who was that man?" Miriam looked at the card, then at her son. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. She spent the day in the particular agony of a person who already knows what they are going to do, but needs the hours to make peace with it. Her friend Denise came over at noon, summoned by a text that said only "something happened, can you come?" Denise arrived with coffee from the gas station 2 blocks over and found Miriam at the kitchen table, staring at the white card, as though it might say something different if she looked long enough. Denise read the name. Read the number. Set the coffee down. "Absolutely not," she said. "I know. Miriam, listen to me. This is how women disappear. A stranger at a market offers you everything and asks for a wife in return. That sentence has never ended well for anyone." "I know, Denise. You have 3 babies. 3. I am aware of how many children I have. Then act like it." Denise sat down across from her, leaning forward, her voice dropping. What do you actually know about this man? Nothing. A name and a number on a card. That's it. Miriam said nothing for a moment. Then, I know he's been watching me for 2 days and hasn't done anything threatening. I know he approached me in a public market in broad daylight. I know that car cost more than this building. And I know that. And I know, Denise said quietly, that you're already trying to talk yourself into it. Miriam said nothing, because Denise was right. They sat in silence for a moment. The triplets were in the next room, audible through the thin wall, Eli narrating something to his sisters with the authority of a boy who had decided he was in charge of the world. Ada laughing, Zara asking careful questions. Denise stayed for another hour. She made the argument 17 different ways, each one reasonable, each one correct. Then she had to leave to pick up her own children from school. Before she walked out, she pressed $40 into Miriam's hand, folded tight, passed over quickly, the way people give money when they cannot afford to give it. For groceries, Denise said. Real ones, so you don't have to call anyone. Miriam closed her fingers around it. Thank you. She used 30 of it on pasta, peanut butter, a loaf of bread, and a quart of milk from the corner store. She came home and fed the children a proper meal, the first in 2 days, and watched them eat with the focused, wordless intensity of small people whose bodies knew exactly what they had been missing. Eli finished first and asked for more. Miriam gave him hers. After dinner, she washed the bowls and stood at the kitchen window, watching the sky go from gray to the deep blue-purple of a Chicago winter evening. The clock on the microwave said 5:41. She thought about the radiator that hadn't worked in 3 weeks. The voicemail from the landlord she had deleted before it finished. The way Ada had said, "My tummy hurts" at midnight, with complete trust that her mother would fix it. She picked up the card. She dialed. He answered on the second ring. "I have conditions," she said without greeting him. "Tell me," he said. "My children come with me. That is not negotiable, not discussable, not revisable later. They come, or I don't. Understood? I keep my own phone. I am not a prisoner. If I decide to leave, I leave." A pause. Brief, measured, reasonable. "And if anything at all, feels wrong for my kids, I walk out the same day. I don't care what you've provided." "Nothing will feel wrong for your children," he said. His voice was level, certain, carrying none of the performance of someone trying to convince. He spoke the way people speak when they are simply stating facts. "You have my word." She almost said, "Your word means nothing. I don't know you." But she was out of options, and the clock said 5:53, and tomorrow morning there were 3 children who would wake up hungry again. "Where do I meet you?" she asked. The wedding happened the next morning at a clerk's office on West Washington Street, 7 blocks from City Hall, in a room with fluorescent lighting that buzzed faintly, and a window that looked out onto a parking garage. 2 witnesses arrived, a man and a woman Miriam had never seen before and would never see again, dressed neatly and carrying the practiced patience of people who had done this kind of thing before. They signed where they were told and stood where they were positioned and did not make small talk. The clerk was a tired man in his 60s who read the vows in the voice of someone who had read them 10,000 times and expected to read them 10,000 more. He did not ask if anyone had objections. He moved through the language efficiently, professionally, without ceremony or warmth. Marcus stood beside her in the same dark coat. He did not fidget. He did not look around the room. He looked straight ahead except for the moments when the clerk addressed him directly, and then he answered with quiet, precise economy. "I do," as though he had decided everything long before he walked through the door. When the moment came, he placed a plain platinum band on Miriam's finger. His hand was warm. She had not expected that. She had built him in her mind overnight as something cold and constructed, and the warmth of his hand against hers was a small, disorienting detail that she filed away without knowing why. She signed her name beside his. Miriam Vane. The clerk said, "You may," and Marcus said quietly, "Thank you," and steered them toward the door. Outside on the salt-crusted sidewalk, the black Escalade waited. Behind it, a second SUV, newer, larger, idled at the curb. The driver of the second vehicle was a woman named Kat, broad-shouldered and unhurried, who introduced herself with a single word and immediately began helping buckle the triplets into their seats without being asked, moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done exactly this. Not this situation, but this kind of thing. Before. Miriam watched her for a moment, then got in. The city passed outside the tinted windows, the skyline, the gray shimmer of the lake, the neighborhoods thinning out into suburbs, the suburbs dissolving into bare trees and two-lane roads that went somewhere Miriam had never been. Eli fell asleep against the window within 20 minutes. Ada pressed her nose to the glass and watched the world scroll past with pure, uncomplicated wonder. Zara held Miriam's hand and said nothing, which was how Zara processed everything, in silence, from the inside out. In the lead vehicle ahead of them, Miriam could see the back of Marcus's head, still, unhurried, looking forward. She had married him 6 hours ago. She did not know where she was going. She did not know what she had put her children into. Or she held Zara's hand tighter and watched the trees close in on either side of the road and told herself, forward. Just keep going forward. 1 hour and 20 minutes outside the city, the lead vehicle turned off the main road onto a private lane she would not have found on any map. The trees thickened. The light changed. Dimmer, filtered. The particular quiet of a place that had been deliberately kept separate from the world outside it. Then the gates appeared. Iron. 12 feet tall. Security cameras mounted on each post, their lenses moving slowly as the vehicles approached. They swung open without anyone touching them, and beyond them stretched a private drive lined with low lights on both sides, leading through manicured grounds toward a structure that took Miriam a full 5 seconds to accept was a house. 3 stories of pale stone, wings extending on both sides, tall windows lit from within, throwing warm gold light across the gravel drive. Mature oak trees flanking the entrance, their bare winter branches reaching upward like something ceremonial. The SUV stopped. Kat opened the door. The cold hit Miriam, but it smelled different here. Wood smoke, pine, clean dark earth, the absence of exhaust, and concrete, and the specific staleness of a building that had been kept barely heated for 3 months. She stood on the gravel drive and looked up at the front of the house and felt the ground beneath her feet, as though checking that it was real. The triplets piled out beside her. There was a beat of silence, the 3 of them taking it in, this impossible, overwhelming thing. And then Eli said, with complete 3-year-old certainty, "We live here now?" "For now," Miriam managed. "Okay," he said, already moving toward the front steps. A man appeared in the doorway. Gerald, 60 or so, silver-haired, with the unhurried bearing of someone who had been running large households for a long time and found it neither impressive nor burdensome. He bowed slightly from the entrance. "Mrs. Vane, welcome. Everything has been prepared. Dinner will be served in 40 minutes, though if the children are hungry now, the kitchen can accommodate them immediately." Miriam stared at him. "Mrs. Vane." The words landed in her chest like a stone dropped into still water. She felt the ripple of it move outward and tried to keep her face steady. "They're always hungry," she said. "Of course," Gerald said, with the warmth of someone for whom this was the most natural answer in the world. "Right this way." Inside was warm, genuinely enveloping warm, the kind that reached into your coat and pulled the cold out of your bones within seconds. Fires burned in stone fireplaces at both ends of the entrance hall. Rugs thick enough to sink into covered the floors. A chandelier above them threw light in all directions, fracturing against the ceiling in patterns that made Ada stop dead in the middle of the hall and look straight up with her mouth open. "Mama," she breathed. "It's like stars." "It's a light," Eli corrected, with authority. "It looks like stars," Zara said diplomatically, and that settled it. The children were taken to the kitchen, a room large enough to contain Miriam's entire apartment twice over, where a cook named Rosie produced grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup with the speed and warmth of someone who had been waiting all day to feed someone who needed it. The triplets ate at a scrubbed wooden table in the kitchen corner, and for the first time in as long as Miriam could remember, nobody asked for more, because there was already more. There was simply more. It sat on the counter, available, waiting, as though abundance was simply the natural condition of this place, and scarcity had never been considered. Miriam stood in the doorway and watched her children eat, and felt something shift behind her sternum, a loosening of something she had been holding so tightly for so long that she had stopped noticing the tension. It released all at once, quietly, without drama, and she had to press her hand flat against the doorframe to stay steady. Marcus appeared beside her. He did not announce himself. He simply stood there, watching the children the way she was watching them. "Your rooms are on the second floor," he said after a moment. "Gerald will show you after dinner. Take whatever time you need tonight. There's no schedule." She turned to look at him. In the warm light of the kitchen, away from the February street and the courthouse fluorescence, he looked different. Not softer exactly, but more dimensional. A person rather than a proposition. "Who are you?" she asked. Not the question she had asked at the market. Not "what do you want?" but the real one. The deeper one. He looked at her for a moment, then at the children. "Someone who keeps his word," he said. "Start with that." He walked away down the hall, unhurried, and left her standing in the warmth, with the sound of her children laughing over soup. The weeks that followed were the strangest of Miriam's life. Stranger, even, than the weeks after Daniel died. Because grief, at least, was familiar. What she was living now had no name she recognized. The days had a shape. The children woke in their own rooms, a fact that still startled her every morning, and came padding down the hall to find her. And together they went to breakfast in the large dining room where Rosie had already laid out more food than strictly necessary, and Gerald stood quietly at the edge of the room, like a man who found deep satisfaction in things being in order. A tutor named Miss Patricia arrived every weekday at 9. A small, brisk woman in her 50s with reading glasses on a beaded chain and an apparently endless patience for 3-year-olds who wanted to tell her about their dreams before engaging with the alphabet. She taught them letters and numbers and early phonics, and within 2 weeks Eli had decided she was his favorite person and followed her around the house between lessons like a small, devoted shadow. Miriam read. She slept. She walked the grounds in the pale winter afternoons, where her boots crunching on gravel paths that wound through bare gardens and past a greenhouse full of green living things that smelled of jasmine and lemon and warm earth. A startling contrast to the frozen world outside the iron gates. She moved through it all carefully, the way you move through something you don't entirely trust yet, testing each surface before putting your full weight down. Marcus was present, but controlled. He joined them for dinner most evenings, sitting at the head of the long table, asking the children questions about their lessons and listening to their answers with a quality of attention that surprised her. He never performed interest. He simply gave it, steadily, the way he seemed to do everything. During the days he was elsewhere, "Business," Gerald said, each time she asked, with the finality of a word that was meant to be the whole sentence. She stopped asking Gerald, but she kept noticing. Men arrived at the estate at odd hours, never through the front entrance, always through a rear gate she had not been shown. They came in pairs or small groups, dressed plainly, carrying nothing visible, departing before morning. They moved with a particular alertness, a way of entering a space with their eyes already reading it, that did not belong to accountants or business associates. A wing on the east side of the ground floor was always locked. She had tried the handle once, casually, on her way past, the way you try a door you expect to be open. It didn't move. The hallway outside it was always slightly warmer than the rest of the house. Phone calls made Marcus leave the room. She would watch the shift in him when his phone vibrated. A micro change in his posture, a tightening around the eyes. And then he would excuse himself quietly and return 10 minutes later with nothing different on his face, except for something in his jaw that had not been there before. She told herself, wealthy men have private business. She was not entitled to every corner of his life. She had her children, she had warmth, she had food, she had kept her end of the bargain. She was his wife, she was here, she was present. The locked doors were not her concern. She almost believed it. The compound was the most beautiful cage she had never agreed to enter, and she spent those weeks trying to decide if the door she'd walked through had been a choice, or simply the only wall with a handle. But then she would hear Ada singing to herself in the garden, or watch Zara work through a picture book with the focused seriousness of a small scholar, or find Eli asleep at the kitchen table with his head on Miss Patricia's phonics workbook. And she would think, whatever this is, they are safe, they are warm, they are whole, and for now, that would have to be enough. It was a Tuesday night, past midnight. Zara had woken from a bad dream, one of the sudden gasping ones, where she sat bolt upright and couldn't say what had frightened her, only that something had. And Miriam had spent 40 minutes lying beside her in the dark, one hand on her back, until her breathing evened out and her body went heavy with sleep again. After, Miriam slipped out of the children's suite and moved quietly down the hall toward the kitchen for water. The house was still. The fires had burned down. The chandelier in the entrance hall had been dimmed to almost nothing. The east corridor was lit. That was wrong. That hallway was always dark after 10. She should have turned around. She knew that. Every reasonable instinct she had pointed back toward the stairs, toward her room, toward the careful arrangement she had made with herself about locked doors and private business and things that were not her concern. She didn't turn around. The door to the east wing was open. Not open, but ajar, 2 inches of gap that threw a thin bar of light across the corridor floor. Voices came through it. Not muffled tonight. Purposeful. Direct. The voices of men in the middle of something that required precision. Miriam pressed herself to the wall beside the door and looked through the gap. The room beyond was nothing like the rest of the house. No rugs, no art, no firelight. A long bare table covered with maps, photographs, printed documents, and a laptop open to what looked like a network of street-level camera feeds. Live footage, multiple angles. The south side grid she recognized, like her own handwriting. Screens along the far wall showed more feeds. A city under surveillance. 8 men stood in a loose arc around the table, all of them in dark civilian clothing, all of them carrying the specific, expensive stillness of people trained never to waste movement. And at the head of the table stood Marcus. Not the man who had asked Zara that evening what letter she was learning. Not the man who poured coffee and read the paper, and moved through the house with quiet, measured courtesy. This Marcus stood at the center of the room, the way gravity stands at the center of a system. Everything oriented toward him, everything responsive to him, nothing moving without reference to him. His voice, when he spoke, had dropped an entire register. The Reyes delivery moves Thursday through the I-94 interchange, he said, pointing to a location on the map, without looking away from the room. I want stationary eyes at the junction from 11 p.m. Nothing crosses that line without my direct confirmation. And if Reyes sends an advance team? One of the men asked. Marcus's eyes moved to him. A pause that lasted exactly long enough. Then they won't make it to the interchange, he said. Yes, boss, the man said. Boss. The word moved through Miriam like a current, cold, clarifying, absolute. She stepped back from the door. Her shoulder found the wall and she pressed against it, breathing through her mouth in slow, deliberate pulls, willing her heart to stop hammering loudly enough to be heard. The water she had come for was completely forgotten. Her legs operated without conscious instruction, carrying her back down the corridor, up the stairs, through the dark hallway, and into her room, where she sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the opposite wall while the sky outside the window moved through its long, slow transit from black to gray. She had married a man named Marcus Vane. She had not married a businessman. She had married the Chicago underworld. And somewhere down the hall, her 3 children were sleeping with their whole hearts in a house that belonged to it. She said nothing the next day. She fed the children breakfast. She sat through Eli's recap of his dream, which involved a dragon who could also drive a bus. She nodded at the right moments. She watched Miss Patricia arrive and settle the triplets into their morning lesson, and then she walked to the greenhouse, where the jasmine smell was thick and warm, and she stood among the plants and made herself think clearly. What were her options? She could leave. Marcus had agreed she could leave. Those were her terms, stated plainly, agreed to without hesitation. But leave to what? South Halstead? The eviction notice? Oatmeal and broken radiators? And Ada asking about her tummy at midnight? She could call the police. She turned this over seriously, the way you turn over something that has edges. Call and say what? That she had glimpsed, through a 2-inch gap, maps and men, and a word, boss, and drawn conclusions? With no evidence, no specifics, and her name now legally attached to his? Or she could do what she had done every impossible day of the past 11 months. Face it directly. She found Marcus in his private study after lunch. He was on the phone, standing at the window with his back to the door. When she walked in and closed it behind her, not loudly, but firmly, with intent, he turned, looked at her once with those reading eyes, and said into the phone, "I'll call you back." He set it on the desk. He waited. "You were in the East Corridor last night," he said. Not an accusation, a fact he was offering to begin with, so they didn't have to perform the pretense of him not knowing. "Yes," she said. He gestured to the chair across from his desk. She sat. He remained standing for a moment, then sat too. Deliberately, she thought, bringing himself to her level. "Ask me," he said. Miriam looked at him. The study smelled of cedar and old paper. Through the window behind him she could see the garden, where the bare trees were starting, barely, tentatively, to show the first suggestion of buds. Spring, trying its luck. "Who are you, actually?" she said. The silence lasted long enough that she thought he might refuse. Then, "My father built the Vane organization in the 1980s, he said. His voice was steady, the same voice he used for everything she was starting to understand. It never performed, it simply delivered. South Side, primarily. Distribution contracts, protection structures, import logistics. He did not dress it in euphemism. When he died, I was 22. The organization was already built, already running. I could walk away and let it collapse. Let the men who had been loyal to my father for 20 years lose everything. Or I could step in." "You stepped in," Miriam said. "I stepped in. And the men I saw last night? Mine," he said. "Loyal, paid and controlled, no freelancers, no unpredictability. What I run is not what most people imagine when they hear the word. It is structured, it is disciplined, and it does not touch civilians." "It touches me," she said quietly. "I'm a civilian." Something moved across his face. Not guilt, not quite. Something more like acknowledgement. "Yes, it does. That is a fair thing to say." She leaned forward. "Are my children in danger?" He did not hesitate, not even for a fraction of a second. "No! This compound has more security infrastructure than most federal facilities in this state. Nothing enters or leaves without my knowledge. No one touches what is under my protection." "They are not under your protection," she said with a quiet precision that surprised even her. "They are mine. I protect them. I always have, and I always will. What I need to know is whether staying here makes that harder or easier." Marcus looked at her for a long moment. The garden light moved behind him, a cloud shifting. "Easier," he said, "by every measure." "Then I need one thing from you," she said. "Complete honesty. Not details, not access to the East Wing. Just honesty about the shape of things. No more finding out through doors left open by accident." He was quiet. Then he extended his hand across the desk, not commanding, not offering comfort. Offering an agreement. The same steadiness with which he did everything. "Deal," he said. She looked at his hand. She thought about Ada, about Eli, about Zara standing guard in front of her siblings at a market stall with the instincts of someone twice her age. She took it. Spring came to Chicago the way it always does. Reluctantly, then all at once. The bare oaks along the drive put out leaves in early April, almost overnight, as though they had been waiting for permission. The garden came back. The greenhouse doors were propped open in the afternoons, and the jasmine smell drifted through the compound on mild days until even Eli noticed it and said it smelled like candy, which was not quite right, but not entirely wrong. Life at the estate found its rhythm. And the children thrived in the particular way of small people given stability after turbulence. Loudly, completely, without looking back. Eli became Miss Patricia's shadow, and then her challenge, racing through phonics at a pace she hadn't expected, and demanding harder books. Ada developed an attachment to Rosie the cook, and could be found most afternoons at the kitchen counter on a stool, watching the preparation of dinner with the focused attention of someone storing information. Zara spent hours in the garden, crouching over things in the dirt, carrying worms to safer locations, with the seriousness of someone running an important operation. They grew. Miriam watched it happen and felt it somewhere so deep in her chest that it didn't have a name yet. She and Marcus built something between them, not quickly, not simply, but with the durability of things made from honest material. She held him to his word, and he held it himself. When things happened in the East Wing, he told her afterward, not the specifics, but the shape. "There was a situation. It's been handled. You and the children were never close to it." She learned to read the tension in his jaw as information rather than threat. And he learned, she could see him learning, slowly, the way people learn things they have no previous template for. That being known by someone was not the same as being vulnerable to them. 3 weeks after their confrontation in the study, the Reyes faction sent 2 vehicles to the compound perimeter at 2 in the morning. She woke to nothing. No shots, no alarms, just the faint sound of vehicles on the drive and then silence. Marcus came to her room at 3 a.m., eyes still in his coat, and stood in the doorway and told her it was over before it began. "You're not hurt," she said. It was not quite a question. "No." "Good," she said, and went to check the children. He stood in the hallway for a moment after she closed the door. Gerald, passing at the end of the corridor, observed that Marcus Vane, a man who had navigated threats, negotiations, and the full weight of an inherited empire for over a decade with a face like Stillwater, stood in that dim hallway for a long moment, looking like a man who had just received something he had forgotten to want. On the triplets' 4th birthday, a Sunday in February, the first anniversary of the worst Tuesday of Miriam's life, Marcus came to the breakfast table, carrying a small wooden box. He set it in the center of the table without ceremony. Inside, nestled in dark cloth, were 3 lockets, silver, engraved, each bearing a name: Eli, Ada, Zara, and on the inside face of each, a single line pressed into the metal: "You belong. You are loved. You are safe." Eli immediately tried to open his with his teeth. Ada held hers up to the light coming through the tall windows and turned it slowly, watching it catch. Zara read the inscription, moving her lips, sounding each word in the careful way she had recently mastered, and then looked up at Marcus with the grave, undeflectable attention that was entirely her own. "Does this mean you're our dad now?" she asked. The table went very quiet. Even Eli set down the locket. Marcus looked at Zara, then at Eli, then at Ada, then, for just a moment, at Miriam, who gave him nothing, kept her face still, let him find his own way to the answer. "It means," he said, with a care she had come to recognize as his version of tenderness, precise, unperformed, entirely genuine, "that I am here every day, for whatever you need, for as long as you'll have me." Zara considered this with the thoroughness she brought to all important decisions. Then she nodded once, apparently satisfied, and went back to her birthday pancakes. Eli asked for more syrup. Ada put the locket on and refused to take it off, wearing it over her pajamas, then over her sweater, then to bed that night where it pressed a small warm circle against her collarbone while she slept. Miriam looked across the table at Marcus. He looked back at her, and something passed between them that had no name yet, but was growing steadily, quietly, with the patience of things that are real, toward one. One morning in April, Miriam stood at the edge of the estate garden, with coffee going warm in her hands, watching the triplets tear through the new grass in the early light. They were loud and fearless and entirely healthy, and the sight of it moved through her like something seismic, too large for her chest, too quiet for words, settling somewhere below language in the place where the truest things live. She was not the woman from South Halsted Street anymore. Not entirely. That woman was still inside her. The one who sat on bare floors counting crackers, who walked to markets with empty hands and a full weight of dread, who pressed her lips to her daughter's head and promised tomorrow would be better, without knowing if it was true. She did not want to lose her. That woman had made choices under impossible pressure that took more courage than anything Miriam had seen since, in anyone. But she was also someone new. Someone who had chosen survival without apology, who had looked at a complicated man living a complicated life and said, clearly, without illusion, "I see exactly what this is, and I am choosing to stay, with my eyes open." Marcus appeared beside her. He didn't announce himself. He never did. He moved through spaces the way he did everything, without excess. He stood with his own coffee and watched the children. "Zara's trying to organize them," he said. "She wants a foot race, but she's trying to set the rules first." "She always sets the rules first," Miriam said. She learned that from watching Ada ignore all rules and still win. A quiet, the good kind. The kind that doesn't need filling. "The gates," Miriam said after a moment, looking toward the iron entrance at the end of the drive. They stood open the way Marcus had ordered them left every morning since February. "You never told me why you started doing that." He was quiet for a moment. "Because a home with locked gates is just a better furnished prison," he said. "You should always be able to leave. The only thing that means anything is that you choose not to." She looked at the gates, then at the garden, where Zara had finally succeeded in arranging her siblings into starting positions for a race only she fully understood the rules of. "I choose not to," Miriam said. "I know," he said. In the garden, Zara counted down with 3 fingers. The race began. Eli surged ahead immediately, all momentum and no strategy. Ada cut diagonally across the grass with brilliant efficiency. Zara ran last because she had engineered it that way. Watching, cataloging, already planning the next one. Eli reached the oak tree first and threw his arms above his head like he had won something enormous and permanent. Miriam laughed, from the bottom of her chest, unguarded, entirely real. Marcus looked at her when she did, and for the first time, in the pale Chicago morning, with spring finally keeping its promise, he smiled too. "Don't go anywhere just yet. There's another story sitting right on your screen, and it was put there for a reason. Click it and see why. You've got time for one more. And if this channel has given you something today, a feeling, a thought, something you want to pass on, then subscribe, ring that bell, and make this a place you return to. Oh, every time you open the app, there should be something here waiting for you. And there will be new stories, real emotions, every single time. We're glad you're here, family. Now go watch the next one.